Welcome to the Podcast for Inquiry, brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, a national educational charity supporting your community for reason, compassion, and secular humanist values. You have answers, we have questions. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood, board member and secular chair for CFIC. Welcome. I speak with David McRaney on today's Podcast for Inquiry. David has been a beat reporter, editor, photographer, voiceover artist, television host, digital content manager, and everything in between. He is the author of the books You Are Not So Smart, You Are Now Less Dumb, and most recently, How Minds Change. He has hosted the podcast You Are Not So Smart for over a decade. In today's conversation, we talk about David's book, How Minds Change. We explore how social context is critical when people form their opinions. People don't change their minds in a vacuum, and David describes how network effects lead to social cascades. David then turns things around and quizzes me about the most recent movie that I've watched as a demonstration of how to get people to think differently. We talk about the role of truth in persuasion and the utter failure of the information deficit hypothesis. I bring you my conversation with David McRaney. David McRaney, thank you for joining me today on Podcast for Inquiry.
Well, thank you for having me, sir.
I want to talk to you today about your book, How Minds Change. Interesting right from the premise, and I enjoyed the book itself. I was a little disappointed. I was hoping that it was going to give me like a mind control brace so I could just zap somebody and they would think the way I want them to, but that's not at all what your book described. So since I was wrong about its contents and my assumptions, can you give us a brief summary of how of your thesis of How Minds Change?
Yeah, it's a weird book to summarize because the idea I had for the book changed over time as I put it together, and it's pretty evident when you read it, it gets written that way. And along the way, all sorts of people wanted me to do a book that was sort of how to change people's minds, and I never wanted to do that book. I didn't want to do How to Win Friends and Influence People Part 2 or whatever. And I also didn't want to write a book that was just Wikipedia with jokes, the kind of book that's just a lot of research papers and things people have seen and then, presented in a way that's fun and funny. I didn't want to do that either. And I really, really didn't want to do the thing that a lot of pop science books do, which is you have sort of a concept, a thesis, a hypothesis, and you go cherry picking all the evidence to prove that you have a really cool idea for lectures. I didn't want to do any of that stuff. So I simply wanted to understand something, which was how do people change their minds and why do we resist it so much? I wanted to understand that from the level of brains and neurons and move all the way up to big social changes. I had did this lecture where someone came up to me. I have this podcast and whole brand, You Are Not So Smart, which is about cognitive biases. And of course, I move in those secular humanist circles that quote things like Christopher Hitchens saying you can't reason a person out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. And I used to believe that. I no longer believe that, spoiler alert. I had someone come up to me at a lecture and they told me that their father had fallen into a conspiracy theory, and they asked me how to get them out of it. And I very condescendingly said, "Oh, you can't," and stop worrying about that sort of thing. And I could feel it coming out of my mouth. I could feel hating what I was saying. I didn't like it. I thought it was pessimistic, and also I didn't know enough about that topic to really say that. It was just sort of signaling my allegiance to that world of stuff that I was into at the time. And then around about that same time, the same-sex marriage in the United States, the attitudes and norms and the opinions related to it shifted enormously. And as someone who grew up in the Deep South and was very aware of prejudice toward LGBTQ people, I was astonished to see that how quickly it changed. I brought somebody on my podcast who told me that it was a political scientist who said that it was the fastest shift in public opinion that had ever been recorded. And we've only been recording it since like the 1930s, but it was about 12 years. And if you weren't keeping up with it, it felt like it happened overnight. So it was like you could see it graphed. 68% of the American public was opposed to same-sex marriage, and then about a decade later, that same 68% was in favor of it. And I just had this weird idea, which was, what if you could take someone and put them in a time machine, and these millions of people, send them back about a decade to meet themselves? Wouldn't they argue with themselves? They would disagree vehemently on this, as people do on wedge issues today. So what happened in their brains between these two moments? It seems so fast. And they probably believed this other way for their whole lives up until something. So that was the original idea. This is what I wanted to go pursue. But as the book came together, it develops an authoritative voice toward the end, but it just starts out I want to know the answers to these questions. So to actually give you the answer to what you asked now, which the premise is, how do we change our minds? Why do we resist? And how does that scale up when we do change, whether it's from learning something individually through experiences or education? How does that scale up to one person persuading another, and then it cascading to very large social changes, often very, very quickly? And that's the idea. That's the book. And to do that, I went all over the world and actually met people in person and tried to figure it out.
Yeah, particularly when talking about things like equal marriage, it reminds me a lot of the Ernest Hemingway quotation, which is fairly famous, is, how did you go bankrupt? And the answer, the other character responds two ways. Gradually, then suddenly. And that really seemed to be
that's it.
Way. Even here in Canada, which brought equal marriage into force well ahead of the United States, at the time that the Canadian government was considering that legislation, it was pretty close. It was like basically 48 in favor, 48 against, with a small margin of error that was unsure. And then again, you fast forward a decade, and it's 75 to 80% in favor, and those that are against tend to keep it to themselves, or it's not people aren't really railing against equal marriage in the same way, and that happens a lot in other areas. So it's something that is so core. It is able to change, but it as you describe in your book, as you talk about it there, it didn't come out of nowhere. That was the result of decades of advocacy on the retail or the street level, door to door, people just coming out to their friends, to their family, to their bosses, to their employees, as well as what I think of as more wholesale things in terms of education, in terms of media, personalities, actors, and entertainment. Like there was movies and TV shows that quite sympathetically portrayed homosexual characters. And it wasn't overnight, but it was an accumulation of all of those things. And then society kind of hits a tipping point, and then a whole bunch of individual minds change. Right. And I think that was really what was one of the great insights of your book that I didn't have coming into it, was that it's not just about the individual person. It's just not me trying to convince you of something. It's, if I want to convince you of something, if I want to change your mind about something, what matters is not just the arguments that I'm having with you, but your whole social context. Who are the people that you interact with? Who are important to you? And what is important to them, to the folks that are important. So can you talk about not just the interactions of like me trying to change your mind, but the importance of the social context in which the person that might change their mind lives, and how that affects their ability or their willingness to change their minds about important issues?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is. I can sum this up, and then I could talk about this part for about 11 hours straight. It is the thing.
All right, well, let's give me 10% of that.
This is so ridiculously fascinating to me, and I still continue to. I just got back from 2 days ago. I just got back from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I went to a conference where they brought together 300 staunch Republicans and 300 staunch Democrats to just meet each other and talk and see what happens next. And it was so I'm still in this world. I can't get enough of it. But the super summary comes from Brooke Harrington. She's a sociologist. And she said that there was if there were to be an equals MC square, social science. It would be the fear of social death is greater than the fear of physical death. And we can pick all sorts of silos to discuss that. If I like to be very deconstructive first. We are social primates. I don't know how. I'm sure your audience is very aware of this, but we are social primates. What gives us our great strength as a species is that we are ultra social beings.
Right. We are storytelling social animals. Yes.
Yes. That's a great way to put it. And the because of this, because we're ultra social, we care more about what other people think of us than pretty much everything else, like including our own mortality most of the time. And as Brooke Harrington would further discuss it, it's sort of like if you feel like your reputation is, if you feel like your life is in danger, you'll put your reputation on the lifeboat and you'll let your body go to the bottom of the ocean. So that is one of those things that makes a lot of other things make sense. When it comes to this punctuated equilibrium we were talking about, which is the way I describe it in the book, it seems like it's going to take forever. It seems like the status quo is going to be forever. It was there your whole life, sometimes generations pass, and then all of a sudden, it seems like things change overnight, like just a couple of years sometimes. And if you're not part of the community that's attempting to affect that change, since you're a middle domino in that cascade, it oftentimes does seem like I turned around and all of it. Now everybody does this. Like there's no more smoking in bars. Like I just turned around. There's no more smoking in bars. You're not aware of all the forces that led up to it. With same-sex marriage equality, there are many things that led up to it. There are some crucial points, but each thing expanded the range of the next thing. And like you were saying, it was there was an incredible amount of activism that then led to certain portions of North America being more open. That openness led to certain portions of North America presenting different types of media to the other portions. This led to all sorts of court cases, and then, of course, Stonewall. And there was a Stonewall happening everywhere in the United States. And anyone who's not familiar with Stonewall, that was a riot that broke out because a trans person was attacked by police. And then they did all these protests where people in the LGBTQ community in California would then demonstrate affection openly, which was looked frowned upon, and police would try to crack down on it. And that became a major node in a larger and larger cascade. And eventually what took place was that the more people in your social network that seemed okay with it, the less you felt okay not being okay with it. And that leads to these wonderful network effects. We've all experienced this. I don't know. Have you ever been to a party or maybe even one that you're giving, and then it just sort of seems like it ends all of a sudden, and you're like, what happened? Like, I thought we were having fun. Like that's the effect that we're talking about, but scaled up. So here's what happens at a party like that. Everybody's doing their thing. Somebody at the party has got to get up early in the morning for some reason. And they're like, hey, everybody, I got to go. I got to get up early in the morning. And everybody's like, oh, I love you. And like, bye, bye, bye. And they leave. But then there's another person who just kind of wants to leave because they're tired. They've had a little too much to drink. And they're like, oh, great. I won't be the first person who leaves. And they also leave with that person. So now there have two people have left. There's a person who was going to stay and go all the way with the party. But when two people leave, they feel like, oh, I don't want to be the kind of person who's the only person left here. And I do feel a little tired. And so that person leaves. Now you have three people who have left. And now you have people who are just sensitive to the idea that looks like people are leaving, and that person leaves. And now four people have left the party, and there are people who are sensitive to the idea that four people have left, and the cascade flows from there.
Right. So everyone's threshold might be different, but each time someone leaves, you're achieving a new threshold.
Exactly. And there are millions of factors that will accumulate to a person's threshold, and those factors will be nuanced and different depending on the issue. In this case, the factors are not quite millions, but you can see that there would be, if we're talking about at the level of neurons, it would be trillions of factors, but at the very high levels of abstraction, just a few factors, right? And this has been true for lots and lots of issues throughout time, where you have a vast social network, which you can imagine, if you want to envision it, just think of it like a chemistry model of little balls and sticks. You have nodes, and then the sticks are going to be people's relationships with one another. And strong relationships in a group are going to be clusters of people who are strongly connected, little cliques and groups. And then there will be, in each one of those clusters, there will be connections across to other clusters. Someone in this group knows someone in this group, and so on. You have vast arrays of these clustered networks. And within that, each node is going to be a person who has a threshold for conformity. And there's up cascades and down cascades. I love the example of the party, but another example would be if you've ever waited to get into a restaurant or a classroom, and it's just like a bunch of people standing there, and someone just goes, "Have you checked the door?" And they open the door, and it's like been unlocked the whole time, or the restaurant's been open the whole time, and everybody goes in. Like,
right, you just assume that someone else has done the due diligence, and, because I mean, there's 7 people here. Someone must have checked. I'll just wait.
Right, and that cluster that builds up through the same social effects as the party leaving out. One person walks up to this door that may or may not be locked, and they have what sociologists would call an internal signal, which is all their previous experiences in this situation so far. Maybe that person checked the door once in a previous encounter with a situation like this, and they opened it up, and the whole classroom turned around and was like, "What are you doing?" And they got very embarrassed, or they opened the door to a restaurant and there was like a private party, something in their experience. So they just walk up and start checking their phone. Second person that walks up sees one person waiting. If they don't have the right threshold to be a rabble rouser of some kind to go test the door themselves, they might just be all it takes for the cascade to begin, because they may say, well, they probably know something I don't know, because there's now one external signal, and
right.
they stop. Now you have 2 people waiting. Once there are 2 people waiting at a door, it's almost inevitable. Like, it would have to be somebody who's has a pretty like killer punk attitude to go ahead and check.
Right, because if I check the door and there's a few people waiting there, then I'm basically accusing them of being stupid.
Yeah,
just by checking, like, regardless of whether the door is locked or unlocked, but just by checking when there's some number of people already there, I'm like, yeah, you people are idiots. I don't trust. It does send a signal that I don't trust you.
And it's hard
maybe
to believe,
that's warranted, and maybe it's not. But it sends that signal, and you might not want to send that signal to 2 complete strangers.
Yeah, and you may just have a disposition of the kind of person who's like, I don't care how many people there. I'm always going to check. Or you may be a person who's experienced like some sort of social cause for doing that in the past. But who knows? We have a randomized set of people who are walking up this door. Usually only takes 2 people for the third person to wait. And very few people have a threshold of conformity where 3 people waiting is not going to have them add to it. But as you can see, every person who is affected by the current level of this cascade creates a stronger force for the next person. And eventually you have 20 people waiting. These are the network forces that tend to accumulate and cause up and down cascades. A behavior that pushes, not only keeps status quos alive, but also breaks them. And in the book, we talk about that toward the end, because I want to build you up to it through all these different things that happen in individual and then dyads of brains. But yeah, that's what happened with same-sex marriage. That's what happened with every gigantic social shift, is that it wasn't so much that one individual iconoclastic person came around who changed everybody's minds, nor was it that there was some sort of argument that entered into the public discourse that just burned through everyone and it made more sense than anything before, or some speech or something like that. Typically what happened is there's been a network effect, a cascade began, in which people's thresholds got overcome by something. And I detail all that in the book and how it happened in this particular example. But you hear me going. I've got 11 more hours about this. I can't. I love it so much. I love cascade effects. I love. One more thing before I let this go and we move forward is that Duncan Watts told me that one of my favorite like thought experiments or metaphors for this is like. It's the susceptibility of the network to the cascade that creates the rapid social change more than anything else. And he was trying to say like this old great man theory of history, or the idea that there are these incredible figures who've come through and they're these mavens or these hyper-connected individuals. This doesn't track with the evidence. What does track is, he said, imagine you're driving down a road through a forest, and every day we're assuming we're going to pretend that you smoke cigarettes. Or we could just pretend there's another person that's doing this. But every day, at about the same spot, you finish your cigarette and you toss it out the window. And nothing ever happens. And then one day you do that, and it causes a forest fire that engulfs, 2,000 acres of prime forest. Why? What happened that time? It's because a lot of different things could accumulate. You have a dry season, and then there's some sort of strike for the people who keep the forest safe from that sort of thing. Then there may have been some sort of not only is it a dry season, but the turn that you took that day, there was a wind had blown through and got some leaves in just a particularly right place. And then when your cigarette hits, the embers dry out. With the little fire you create dries out the next level, and you have this giant cascade. And he's basically saying that when the conditions are right, it doesn't matter how big the spark is. It could be a cigarette, it could be a lightning bolt, it could be a nuclear bomb. Any spark would have set it all off. And it's the susceptibility of the network to change that is what is going to predict whether or not you're a prime moment for massed cascades of social change.
Yeah, and one of the things that I took away from your book that I thought was particularly useful, there's another expression, I don't know the origin, but let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Yeah.
And what the reason that comes to mind is I often want to know, like, what's the best thing to do? I want to do the best thing to achieve, the CFIC's goals of reason, compassion, secular values, and promote those broad, like, not just amongst the elites, the decision makers, business leaders, politicians, laws, regulations, and so on, but also for those values to be widespread in Canadian society, globally too, but I'm primarily focused in my home country of Canada. And so, like, what's the best thing to do? My time is limited. So I don't want to waste my efforts. But what I got from your book is there is no best thing, or at least there's no way to know in advance
That's correct.
what the best thing to do is. But if you work on several fronts at once, then one of them might be the right one. You won't know in advance. In hindsight, you can identify what it was, but you won't be able to do that in advance. So you really do have to make the arguments, be logical, be persuasive to people, but also you've got to really meet people where they are and take
Absolutely.
that context into account.
And you need indefatigable consistency in your attempt to strike many areas of the network simultaneously for a long period of time, because one of those will be the vulnerable node, as they call it, the percolating local cluster, as they put it in the network science.
But the other thing that is really important is that without that broad range effort, if you focus your efforts too much, then great, you get to convince that one target of your attention, but then it doesn't spread. It's the widespread efforts, it's the broad efforts that, while not necessarily changing people's minds directly, creates the conditions where they might change their minds at some point. And then when you do convince that one person, that's going to have a better effect on the person, I guess, adjacent in the node. Whereas if you haven't prepared the ground, then even if that one person does change their mind, it's not going to cascade to the next person. And then I think you use the metaphor of the domino. If that domino is missing, it just
that's right. Yeah.
Over, and it doesn't just keep going to everybody else.
Yeah, and a lot of the great cascade examples like from this research involve like two. To make it very simple, like there are two groups, and they have everybody. They have a different mix of thresholds of conformity within these two groups. But one group starts to saturate, while the other group starts to saturate, and let's say group B saturates a little faster. And it just so happens to be there's one person in group B who is connected to someone in group A. Group A, it would have remained stagnant, but that one person who's connected to it meets that person's threshold. They were on the verge, and then group A saturates. Now you have two saturated nodes, but there's one person from each connected to somebody. In group C, they exert their influence. So it has to happen on multiple fronts. There is a targeted way you can go about doing this, which was used during COVID. The UK did this to try to get past hesitancy. And to put it very, very simply, is target the least hesitant people within the most hesitant community is the like sort of the playbook of this. Like you target who is the most hesitant, which group is most hesitant toward, in this case, vaccines, and then identify where do they hang out and who are the people they trust. Like where do they who do they consider sort of the elite, trustworthy people within their community, and then speak to those people and see if you can form an alliance with those people, and then those people will speak to the least hesitant. If you can get just a smattering of the least hesitant people within the most hesitant group, they could possibly start that cascade, because each person who adds to the group becomes makes a more influential cascade. So that's one way you can target. There are a couple of there's 1,000 ways to go about it, but I found that one was really fascinating.
Yeah, that reminds me of Israel's strategy. They not only did the government come out very strongly in favor of the COVID vaccines, but they sort of distributed the message so that business leaders and most effectively, as it turned out, religious leaders. So primarily when the rabbis and the imams said to their congregations, please be safe, get the vaccine. I don't know. I don't think that the Israeli government knew at the time that was going to be the most effective means. They tried a number of different perceptions, but getting the religious leaders on board and to encourage their congregations to get vaccinated, and the uptake for vaccines in Israel was among leading in the world.
That's exactly the same with the thing that happened in the UK. They said, let's go to religious institutions. Their most hesitant community were certain pockets of the Muslim community who were like, I have very good reasons not to trust this government. And they had imagined this is something, who knows what they're putting in this? Who knows what the idea is? Which is similar to what goes on in the United States. Many of the people hesitant there are like, I don't trust the government. I don't know what they're putting in this stuff. But their approach was to address religious leaders in their communities and even turn those like places of worship into the distribution centers for the vaccine. And that was the right approach. They were able to get, I think it was 83%, like they went from massive hesitancy to reducing it by like 83%. The United States did nothing like this. Of course, we were, there was a very poor response to this in the United States. But yes, there are ways to go about doing this to get something out of it. And believe it or not, there are scientists who study this. And if you are a person who's in governments and you care about this thing, you can actually ask those scientists for help, and they will do that. And there were countries that did that, and there were countries that didn't. So,
there was something that I was thinking a lot about while reading your book, and I think it's going to be something on the minds of a lot of our listeners, and that is, you don't talk a lot about truth in your book or accuracy, and you know, to my mind, or you know, before reading the book, and for most of my life, like I want to be right. Like if I'm talking, like I don't think that evolution. I don't want people to understand evolution just because I'm enamored of the idea, or that I'm paid for by Big Evo, or that Darwin is a saint and I want everyone to worship him. I want evolution taught in our classes, and I want people to have a broad understanding or a basic understanding of evolutionary principles, because that's how we as a species came to be. And to me, truth matters. But when I read your book, How Minds Change, truth and accuracy and fidelity to reality it's almost a footnote. It's mentioned, but it's not front and center, and that was a little bit disconcerting for me as a reader, because it's so important to me personally, philosophically, ethically, and morally, and yet it seems to be at best a minor consideration in changing people's minds. Do you agree with that assessment?
No.
And can you put my mind at ease, or talk about that a little bit?
No, I like this is. I mean, it's interesting for you to say that, because like I'm a science journalist, and it's like I share your fundamental values here, and I've been to many conventions around the kind of people that hang out with, or when he was still alive, James Randi, and I have given the demon haunted world as a gift about 5,000 times. So I'm in your camp, right? I'm in your tribe. I'm in the community of people who really care about evidence, fact-based approaches to everything. But the book is very much talks about this a lot, but it doesn't. I approach it from. It's very important to note that the information deficit model does a lot of harm for people like ourselves, and has done that for a long time when it comes to our attempts to get more accuracy and evidence-based stuff to take place in the world. And for anyone who's not familiar with the information deficit model, which is now called the information deficit hypothesis, because ironically the evidence does not support the model, is that you just need to dump a lot of facts and evidence on people, and they'll change their minds. And the reason that people are hesitant toward vaccines, or believe the earth is flat, or think that evolution is, in their minds, just a theory, and don't understand what the word theory means in science versus common vernacular, or that the reason that there is misinformation out there, that religion has such a hold on portions of politics that should be non-religious, that the reason all this is happening is because people just don't have all the evidence. If they just had the evidence, they'd change their minds.
Okay, but how do people? Why would people trust you? Like when you say, here are the facts, here are the evidence. Okay, you list a whole bunch of things, and I can imagine thinking, well, if that were true, if everything you just told me, if all the facts and evidence that you just listed were true and accurate, well, then of course I would agree with your conclusion, and I would change my mind. But and then following the but will be, here's all the reasons why I don't trust you. You might be lying, or you might be cherry picking, or you might you're paid for by the industry
Right.
that you're defending. So I don't trust you.
Yeah, that's what I said. That's what I was saying.
As a legitimate source. So it doesn't matter what your information is, what your evidence is. Like, you are claiming evidence, but is it really evidence, or is it fabricated, or is it cherry picked, or is it
that's where I was
valid?
headed. The information deficit model claims that, or the idea was that the reason people have misconceptions, or they're inaccurate, or have false assumptions, factually speaking, is because they just basically are ignorant. They haven't been exposed to enough evidence. Right. But it falls apart immediately because study after study after study throughout all of psychology, neuroscience, and all the social sciences shows that when you dump a bunch of facts and evidence on people, they very often will just become even more sure of their previous level of confidence in the thing that was not true. And that's because of the things you noted. People believe things for reasons, and if you don't address the reasons behind their confidence, then the reasons behind why their identity may be at threat for assuming anything other than what they already assume, then you won't get what you're looking for. But I feel like I addressed this quite heavily in the book. Like, I feel like it's almost half of the book is about this one particular thing. I do spend a lot of time talking about attitudes and values, because I think this is where a lot of people in this world of being concerned about why are there still flat earthers, and why is evolution not taught in every school in America, is this. I think it's this sort of a misconception among this group that you believe things simply because they're true. The fact that you value all this has a large emotional component. There's some motivating factor to why you fell into this community of people who feel this way.
Absolutely, there is. Yes.
Yeah. Right. And we can talk about that in a second. I just want to get this one thing out, that attitudes, values, and beliefs are three very different mental constructs, three very different things that are emergent properties of neurons doing their business. An attitude is a valenced positive to negative evaluation of something. If I say, do you like chocolate cake? And you say, yes, very much, that's an attitude. And the fact that you know what your attitude is and can address it, that's a belief. And if you're a person who's been making chocolate for the last 100 years, and your family's been making chocolate for generations or whatever, it may be a value as well. But these are three very different things. If I ask you, is the president a good president? And you say the president's a great president, you might think that's what this person believes, but that's not a belief. That is a attitude. And addressing an attitude is much different than addressing a belief when it comes to persuasion or any other kind of rhetorical technique. And addressing a belief, on the other hand, I think for many people, they feel like it's just some sort of binary encoded something within their mental models, when beliefs necessarily come with an estimation of confidence. If I say, is today Tuesday? Is today Wednesday? If I ask you, do you have 2 feet and you say yes, and I say, how sure you are of that, there will be a percentage confidence that you might be able to present. Confidence is a feeling, and at some level, confidence is closer to an emotion than it is some sort of non-superiorly logical thing that would be produced by a robot or by one of the fictional characters that we often love in these worlds, like Spock or Data or something like that. And then a value is just where do you think you should put your time, money, and effort? And depending on all of these things put together, we may disagree on all that. And all of these things are changing constantly based off the amount of the evidence we've been presented, and also the amount of the experiences we've had. But more than anything, these things are going to be altered. Your confidence levels and your attitudes, your values are going to be altered by the circles in which you find yourself and you've come up through, like the sort of social primate you are, the social systems that you're embedded within. So let's do something very meta here. I would like to talk to you about this through the lens of the techniques that I could talk about in the book. If you're cool with it, I would love to talk to you this way.
Sure, why not? I guess we'll get. I was hoping to have people learn more about you, but we can turn the lens on to me for a bit.
It'll be the same thing. I'll introduce what I'm going to do with a simple format, and then we'll do what I'm actually going to ask. So just very easily, what's the last movie you remember watching?
The last movie I saw was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Oh wow! Okay, so you're getting ready for Dial of Destiny, I guess.
Yeah, well, I wasn't sure about after the fourth one. I'm expressing some skepticism about the fifth one, but numbers 1 and 3 were great fun.
Yeah, I totally understand. So you rewatched The Last Crusade. Upon rewatch, did you like it?
I did. Yes.
Yeah. It holds up. Do you feel like it holds up?
Yeah, I mean, it's not. There are things that when I've watched it many years ago in the cinema, there are things that made me cringe a little bit. Certain plot holes were not evident to me then that I could see now. Certain character traits that I thought were admirable in the past are not so worthy of emulation today. But yes, it's a great fun adventure, and I did enjoy it.
I too, I love that movie, and I haven't watched it in a while, but I can just I still remember the when his dad gets shot. I remember as a little when I don't remember exactly how old I was when that happened, but I remember thinking that's impossible. No, I love the tank scene for some reason. I love that Spielberg had tried to double down on the truck scene from the
first one.
Yeah. I was like, which is one. When I was a kid, I would pretend I was doing that truck scene all the time with like cardboard boxes and couches. And let's imagine you're like a movie reviewer, and you have a scale from 1 to 10, and 1 is going to be like reserved for movies that the people who made that movie should go to federal prison for putting that out in the world, and 10 is reserved for like if we ever meet aliens, like if aliens ever come to Earth, one of the gifts will be that movie on DVD. So where would you put The Last Crusade, like 1 to 10?
Probably a 7.
7, and that's high. That's high. That's
it's great fun. Yeah,
that's almost meet the aliens level. But how come it's not an 8 though? Like what keeps it from going up to 8?
So again, so I think I answered that just when I was talking about it. There are certain things where there's a scene in about the first third where he uncovers a tomb, and it's covered in gasoline and a bunch of rats, and the whole thing gets set on fire, and then they just dive under the water, and then they come up, and then they surface in the middle of a piazza in Venice, and there was like this huge explosion right underneath where all these people are like sipping coffee. It's kind of crazy, like that there's huge continuity gaps like that. So that bothered me. Indiana Jones doesn't, his treatment of women and really of artifacts. Like he just goes in, makes stuff up, improvises everything, and it all goes catastrophically wrong. And the number of priceless and irreplaceable artifacts that he destroys in the process is the one thing that he's interested in. These sorts of things, can matter. And as an adult, it it doesn't weigh on me that it takes me out of the movie and I don't enjoy it, but it's not a perfect film either.
Yeah. And I'm noticing like these things you're mentioning, they seem very related to the kind of values that put you in the position you're in right now, to be doing this podcast, to be part of the organization you're a part of. Like you were bothered by a lot of the inattention to evidentiary detail in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and his disrespect for valuable artifacts that should be included in the academic discourse that he's like just barreling past. You're supposed to be an archaeologist. You're supposed to be a learned man. Like, am I right? I'm feeling like that's part of what's pulling it down. Yeah. And I love that. I love that movies oftentimes, like it's very easy to say I like it. It's very easy to sample my attitude. I can just say, yeah, it's great. I had a great fun. And then if I want to articulate things and get in there and metacognate and then like hold space for another person to do that, this moment of articulation is beautiful, because you start to feel, I do bring these values to the fore. So let's do it for the book that we're talking about, that I've heard a lot about these days, How Minds Change. I've
heard of that. Yes.
In this case, there's something different here. You've made a claim, and the claim is that the book doesn't really focus as much on pure evidentiary things and truth-based argumentation as it ought to, or as you would like it to.
Well, no, actually, sorry. My claim is, just for the sake of accuracy, my claim is slightly different. I would have hoped that minds change, that truth and accuracy and fidelity to the way the universe actually functions mattered more in changing minds. Not that you were at fault as the author for not focusing on it, but I had hoped that fidelity to truth and accuracy really mattered more in changing people's minds, and it turns out that it's a secondary factor at best.
What would you say would be the primary factor as presented by the book?
I would say that, so the primary factor is essentially inherited beliefs, not necessarily from one's parents. I don't mean in a genetic sense, but from one's social social circle, which includes family and friends and work and so on. That people tend to adopt the beliefs of those around them, and different people are weighted differently, and that changing one's minds requires both inconsistency, so observed things that are inconsistent with that belief, and an acceptance or a perceived acceptance of a different perspective amongst the people that matter most to the individual.
Yeah, but I almost went into these other steps, but now by just kind of getting started here, you've provided this sort of clarification that keeps me from arguing something that was not even relevant to what the discussion should have been. And I hear what you're saying. Yes, in the portions of the book that I'm discussing attitudes, and especially politics, because there's a lot of attitudes and values. Yeah, you have to use rhetorical techniques that kind of go there. That's just because those are domains in which that's what you're actually discussing. People use evidence in those domains merely as justifications and rationalizations for an emotional state.
Yeah.
And
I was on high school and university debating teams, and you're arguing in favor or against a particular resolution, and you use the truth instrumentally. If the evidence is in your favor, hammer the evidence. Mm-hmm. If the evidence is against you, hammer the table.
I'm with you. And I don't go into fact-based, evidence-based, claim-based things, even though I talk about it a lot in the introduction, and there's a whole couple of chapters where I tell you exactly what's going on, from a science-based perspective when it comes to how minds change. But when we get into the persuasion section of the book, you're right. It's only when I get into deep canvassing and motivational interviewing that we just start talking about claims, just fact-based claims, and how do you deal with them when you're pretty aware that from your at least as much as you can understand the issue that the person may be incorrect. So in using the rhetorical techniques from the book with you in this conversation just now, what's taken place is I changed my own mind, which is a good outcome. I was wrong about what you're even stating, and I think that's cool. Yeah, you're right. The book sort of has three portions, and then the third portion is the persuasion portion. And in the persuasion portion, I spend more time talking about how to address things that are that through these they're called technique rebuttal, these emotional and rhetorical techniques. And the reason for that is because I was hoping to reach of many different audiences who just don't understand that if you want to persuade people on topics that are mostly based on those sorts of things, that your fact-based approach will not work. And because of that, you will fail, and you will think that people are unreachable because of it. And I think in the book I say it's like trying to reach the moon with a ladder. And when you don't get there, you're like, well, moon's unreachable.
Yeah. It works great for the first 10 feet, works great for the next 10 feet, works great for the next 10 feet, and then you kind of run out of, you stop making progress.
And I hate that. I'm with you. I wish it was different. I wish it did, but that's because when you're in a good faith environment where everybody's playing by the same rules, like scientific method or whatever, and we can go up to lecterns and discuss things, or we can hand papers back and forth and vet them through our processes. But when you're speaking with people out there, or just with your family, or especially if you're dealing with a politician or something, or dealing in the political space, that's not a good faith environment for that kind of discussion, and people aren't playing by those rules. You'd have to pull them into that space if you could.
Right.
But if you're going to meet them where they're at, you're going to have to use rhetorical techniques that are going to feel like, oh man, sometimes it feels like you're using the dark arts, right? Like it feels like you're.
It's funny. So 3.5 years ago, February of 2020, just before the pandemic struck in North America to a large extent, I gave a talk on how to talk to anti-vaxxers. And I used that exact phrase, the one that you just did. It's like, if you want to convince somebody, and this is before I read your book, of course, I said, you have to start by meeting them where they are. Mm-hmm. And only by meeting them where they are, and can you hope to bring them along to a different way of viewing the world. If they start here and you're over on the other side of a chasm, and you're just yelling across, then you're never. It doesn't matter how accurate your arguments are and how evidence based, they're going to fall upon deaf ears. You have to understand where they're coming from, and then bring them along to a more reality based perspective, step by step. And so that was actually one of the things that I quite liked about your book, is that even without the incredible research that you clearly put into writing this, I was able to intuit at least a few things right when I talked about that, and that you're using exactly the same phrase that I used in that talk makes me feel good. And I've got a little bit of an understanding of how this stuff works.
Yeah, I think all these rhetorical techniques, and I was going to ask you how certain are you, or that the book doesn't do this, and I was going to use the same thing we did with the movie. For anyone listening, the movie thing that I did, you can do that with anyone, and it's great. It's a great technique to just get to know another person and establish rapport, and it's just fun. But I like to use it as a neutral example of how you would engage someone on an issue that's much more charged. So if we were talking about gun control, for example, which is something that's greatly debated.
Yeah, so that's a perfect segue, because it's one thing, I think, if we're talking about evolution or flat Earth, right? That these are fact-based empirical claims. There are things that are just plain wrong, and things that are supported by the evidence, right? But when we're talking about gun control, and when we're talking about things like same-sex marriage, equal marriage, there's certainly a right and wrong from a moral perspective, but there's not a wrong, like factually wrong take, right? You can say that gun control, we should outlaw them completely. There should be no guns. Anyone in the possession of a gun is going to be executed, right, in some horrible state. Or there should be no rules, and everybody should walk around, or is entitled to walk around with an armory strapped to their chest. These are both at least empirical possibilities, and so it comes down to what you as an individual or a society want to have. What goals do you want to achieve? And then you can evaluate, do certain regulations, laws,
currently it's not an evidence
achieving those goals.
Totally. I mean, currently it's not, it will become an evidence-based issue at some point when we've done the research. Right now, we have not done enough. When I say we, I mean the scientific community has not researched the issue enough to say this particular policy structure does result in this outcome that we would like to have, which is fewer mass shootings, let's say, or whatever it is. There will be a way to approach it in an evidence format, but most of the arguments you're going to have over gun control right now, that's not even what we're discussing. It's exactly what you just described. And you can frame it the same way we frame the movie, which is like 1-10, and you already gave sort of that dynamic. One is like if you say the word gun out loud, you go to jail for the rest of your life. And or we could turn it around. Like 10 is if you say the word gun out loud, you go to jail for the rest of life. And 1 is everybody gets an assault rifle in the mail once a month, regardless of their criminal record. And where do you put yourself? And the other person can say, well, I'm kind of here. I'm on this number. And then we can get into it. Like, why not higher? Why not lower? Why that number? And it's very quickly you go from I just feel this way to a whole lot of rationalizations and explanations and justifications. And then once somebody's talking about those sorts of things, we can then back into, well, why does that feel like a proper justification for you, and what methodology are you using to vet that? And then now we're talking about epistemology, and now we're in a space, and it's a great gift for people to hold space for each other, kind of discover what is motivating my sort of strongly attitudinal and emotional reaction to this. In the book, we talk about that a good bit, but I do get to street epistemology, which is designed for fact-based claims, which is the thing I think is on your wish list. That was high on your wish list, and it works very similarly because if we're talking about flat Earth, and in the book I spent a nice week with a flat earther in Sweden, and it was great. It works very similar. I just ask, but we just turn the attitude into a level of confidence. I ask, like, we do the same thing. You have to avoid shaming, which is the most important part of all this. We're social primates, remember. I need to make sure that nothing I communicate comes across as you should be ashamed for feeling that way or thinking that thing, or you should feel really stupid for thinking something that's not true. Don't do that. What you want to start out with is, what's your claim? What is your fact-based claim? And if it is the Earth is flat, or if they present it even in a more complex way, get them to articulate that as best they can and repeat it back to them so that you really know what they're saying and that you're not getting their argument incorrect. And then at some point you want to ask, what reasons do you ask what level of confidence do you have in this? Like are you 70% sure the Earth is flat? Are you 90% sure the Earth is flat? And whatever number they give you, and if you frame it properly, like I tried to, when I was talking about the movie, I was trying to give you such extremes that you wouldn't give me a 1 or a 10, because that gives me a little breathing room. But with this, you can do the same thing but they might say 100, they might say 99, but don't worry about it. You can still continue the conversation. How sure are you that the Earth is flat? And if they say whatever they say, they're going to give you a percentage. If it's over 70, usually a person who believes something, they're going to say it's over 70. And then you ask, what reasons do you have to hold that level of confidence? What is it that you've seen? What is it you've learned that makes you feel that way? And then now you're having a different conversation.
Yeah. And what I love about this approach.
Go ahead.
What I love about this approach is that I find that a lot of people don't have good reasons for opinions that they have, and because they've heard it from someone that they like. Like there's like someone charismatic, whether it's a friend of theirs or someone that they heard on TV, or a character in a film, or a politician or a religious leader, but they're essentially parroting the talking points that they've heard from somebody that they liked, and they liked the way it sounded, or they liked something about that. And what your method does is that it kind of says, all right, well, if I just come at you head on and do this, then there's an answer. There's a talking point answer to the most common arguments against it. But by just saying, okay, why so high? Why not higher? Why not lower? What they've already heard, the talking points that they've already memorized, don't apply here. And then so they actually have to start thinking about it, and then something changes when they stop just responding with essentially canned or pre-prepared answers, whether they've thought about it consciously or not. But they actually have to compose something new. They have to answer a different question that they haven't heard before. They're not responding. They start thinking. And that's kind of the entree that I have found has been great. You have to find a way where they're in some way novel territory for them, and that's when a real conversation starts, where there's actually a possibility for.
You cannot copy and paste anything out of yourself into another person.
And I think that you list a few different techniques in the book here, and it helps you get to that point, and that prepares the way for a mind to change. And I really appreciated that.
Oh, thank you. This works. Like, I've seen it used in fact-based things quite a bit, and it's because, much to our chagrin, maybe we believe things because we have reached a level of confidence about that thing, and maybe depending on the kind of like epistemic training you've had, you will have different ways of reaching that level of confidence. For some people, I hear this very often amongst people who are still vaccine hesitant, like things don't pass the smell test. They like saying that. It's just their way of saying like, I'm skeptical. But why are you skeptical? Like, what's driving your skepticism? And what drives some people's skepticism is much different from what somebody else would drive another person. Like, if I was a virologist, my skepticism is driven by a completely different set of thinking tools than a person who has no familiarity with those things. They're going to be driven by the people that I trust in the domains in which I traffic are saying certain things that make me feel skeptical about this. But it's very unlikely the person has ever articulated any of that. It's very unlikely any of it's salient. In a conversation where you task a person to identify about where would you put your percentage level, and then I ask you, well, how do you justify that? You don't have to use these words. You just have to get them to do this. Like, what's your justification? What's your rationalization? And once that's out in the open, I ask, say that, if we were to have the thing you were discussing just now, they say, I saw someone say this who I trusted, but they're probably not going to say that. They're going to say, I read this here. And then you'll say, what you want to get to, what the last stage you're trying to get to is, what methods are you using to determine that is a good enough justification to reach that level of confidence? And
right. I guess if you just what you were saying before about COVID vaccines, well, you're not a virologist. I'm not a virologist. Neither of us are immunologists. Like, neither of us have any direct expertise in that. And like the vast majority of people that you're going to talk to don't have any direct knowledge. And so it really comes down to, who do you trust? And how do you determine?
And the next thing is, why do you trust those people?
That's right. Or
distrust those people? And we have to admit this to ourselves. Like, imagine your audience is probably a lot like us, which is, we are not climate experts. We are not vaccine experts. We are not AI experts. Whatever it is, whatever it is we actually happen to be an expert in. We're not an expert in the rest of that stuff, I bet. Because you take a lot.
You're an expert in like one, or like, if maybe, congratulations, two things, but then you're not about everything else.
I remember I'm preparing a podcast about quote, doing your own research. And in one of my examples is this woman who is a scientist who is she's an expert on a certain type of crab. She has spent 26 years studying the gastric system for one crab species, and that's what it takes to actually be an expert on something. And that's how much work you have to do. And for you to have, and there is a lot of, that's one little piece of one little crab. To actually be an expert on, quote unquote, the environment or vaccines, you need thousands of experts who are that micro targeted in their little level of expertise, working as a community of expertise. So we all have to admit to ourselves, we probably have really strong opinions about a lot of science-based, evidence-based, fact-based issues for which we don't know shit. We are not experts. Yeah. So how come we feel so strongly about those things? And this is actually what you're up against when you're meeting someone who has a different feeling about that, who you assume is incorrect. Why do they feel so strongly in the other direction? It should be a mystery that you would like to solve. It shouldn't be a debate you're trying to win. You should be thinking, okay, I bet that person's decent if you've met them. They probably share values. They probably want to solve the same problems I want to solve. They probably want their kids to be happy the same way I want that to be. They probably don't want nuclear war the same way I don't want it, and so on. So can we get shoulder to shoulder in some way and go, I wonder why we disagree? And what I argue for in the book is a lot of times the reasons behind our disagreement have nothing to do with this evidence. There's something else driving our trust, like you've been saying over and over. And one of the most important steps in all this is, why do I trust these scientists? Like, it's a question you should like journal yourself to an answer to before you get engaged, before you decide you want to start arguing with people. Like, I don't know, Leslie, why do we trust these scientists so much? What's up with that? Like, there's got to be a reason, right? Like it can't just be because I value truth, because I can go a level deeper. Well, why is that? How come that's a value? Why is that so important to you? Like, at some point we can get to, we're going to come up against like a line that we can't go underneath because we'll get into some sort of source code of the brain that we can't access. But there are motivating factors and drives that we must account for that are making me feel a certain way toward scientific institutions that's making this other person not feel that way. And oh no, that person won enough votes to be a senator, and that's a problem. But if I want to debate them, I need to understand what's driving them. And they don't know either most of the time. And a lot of the rhetorical techniques I discuss in the book help them discover it for themselves.
Right. And we all have to remember that, people are human. Like, people a little bit older than you and I might remember advertisements like 9 out of 10 doctors prefer the smooth taste of Camel cigarettes. Right. Or more recently, I'll just say 2 words: Purdue Pharma. If you're talking about somebody that doesn't trust the entire pharmaceutical industry, that there's often good reasons. Like, we dismiss conspiracy theorists as dumb or going down a rabbit hole, but unfortunately, there are conspiracies in the world. Right? There are people that fabricate or bury evidence, and these things do happen. So you can't simply say that because someone says that there's a conspiracy that it must be false. I've got one final question for you.
Sure.
Because
thank you for letting me go crazy just then, because I'm very passionate about this, and I love it.
I think I could talk to you for 11 hours, but I would enjoy it. I'm not sure about you or if people want to listen to a podcast that long, but what I most came away from your book, and just to remind people, it's like How Minds Change. It is that it's a powerful set of tools, and the tools to persuade people, to get people to change their minds, is not to get them to change to the values that I have or the values that you and I share. This can be used. The tools that you described can really be used by anybody to any end. And so, what advice do you have for organizations like the Centre for Inquiry Canada to try and move society towards more reasoned, compassionate, secular guided principles, knowing that there are those that are against scientific inquiry, who think that religious and not secular values should predominate, when the tool set is available equally to them as to us?
Yeah, well, ideally that's what happens here, because the rhetorical techniques I champion in this book are the kind in which both parties are open to the possibility that they might be wrong. And wrong can mean many things. You can be factually wrong. You could hold an attitude that is based off of a very small sample size, or based off of experiences that were anomalous and not the kind that usually people have in those situations or with that attitude object. You could have values that are based off the challenges you faced up until now that aren't the kind of values that make for a good society. Ideally, if you're having the kind of conversations that I advocate for and that I give you frameworks for in this book, you will identify within that conversation if it's you who have based your confidence on weak evidence, or it is you who has based an attitude off of skewed experiences, or it's you who has a value set that actually will not generate the outcome that you're looking for, or it's you that is desiring an outcome that would not be best for everybody. If your attitude's harmful, or your beliefs are on shaky ground, or your values need to be reassessed, then that should come out of the conversation you're going to have with this person, because they're going to be doing the same thing, and that's what I'm advocating for. There are some assumptions here that the Center for Inquiry was going to have, right? Which is these people don't. You said they don't value secular input. Maybe that's not true. Maybe they don't value it in the way you'd like them to right now, and there's a reason for it, and you could figure that out in this conversation. That maybe they're actually quite open to what you'd like them to consider. It's just they're in a certain situation now where it's very difficult for them to do so. Also, whatever it is that's driving opponents to your mission, that they find has support within their religious community or in the religious texts, whatever's driving that may be something that they could discover that you also value, that you share values and you share the goals. And it turns out that they were justifying their position through this authority text or this authority group merely because they needed that backup. But when they discover that you're actually aligned, they no longer need that external justification. It starts to move to the wayside. The same way that, like, there's a period of time when very religious people wouldn't believe that Jupiter existed, and then now it's totally okay. But it became less of a threat once they realized, oh, you weren't suggesting that means that there's no God. You're just saying that God made the planets. Right. There's always a way to get there.
Geocentrism, right? As well, right?
Yeah. There have been a lot of things that very deeply religious people have opposed until they figured out a way that they could be okay accepting it as long as it didn't threaten this other thing that they thought was being threatened. So my shorter answer is, I feel like if your organization really wants to reduce harm when it comes to attitudes and behaviors, if your organization really wants a democracy that is built on evidence and values the scientific method across the board, and your organization really values a value set in which we put our time, money, and effort in things that truly make for a better world, then there's really no opportunity for people to misuse these techniques because they need to be coming in wanting the exact same thing. And if you agree with those two things, the kind of conversations you have will get there. It's only when people nefariously wish to generate harm and of all these other ideas that I put forth, if there's no good faith in that, then these rhetorical techniques they just fall apart immediately, because it's just easier to use fear, and it's just easier to use coercion, and it's just easier to use propaganda. These rhetorical techniques fall apart when both parties are actually trying to do something nice for each other. So that's my weird roundabout way of answering all that.
All right. Well, David McRaney, thank you so much. This has been great. We've only skimmed the top of a lot of the ideas. So I encourage people that want to delve deeper to read the book, How Minds Change. I know you have an active online presence. If people want to find out more about you, where can they go to hear more of your thoughts?
I have 3 ways now. It used to only be 2. The You Are Not So Smart is my podcast that I've been doing for 11 years. Very easy to find all my stuff there. youarenotSoSmart.com, at You Are Not So Smart, wherever social media, at Not Smart blog on most social media. The other thing is my website. It's just davidmcraney.com. You'll find everything there, including the books. And then I have a newsletter. It's just called Disambiguation. It's over on Substack. So those are the 3 easiest ways. But if all that was too much to remember, davidmcraney.com.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today on Podcast.
Hey, thank you for challenging me. You're the only person that has interviewed me that said, hey, I think your book should have done this and it didn't do it. And it was awesome. And I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Honestly, the goal of Podcast for Inquiry is to have respectful, challenging conversations about complex topics. Sometimes controversial, although that's not necessary, but challenging, respectful conversations. And I certainly think we achieved that today.
Yeah, I really like that. Thank you so much. I wish you the best of luck in the future, and I will tell everybody about this show. I love it.
All right. Thank you so much. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Links for today's discussion can be found in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe and engage in the conversation. Comment, rate, and review. Email us at podcast@centerforinquiry.ca. We'd love to hear your perspective. The Podcast for Inquiry is brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada. We are a national educational charity supporting reason, compassion, and secular values. To our supporters, thank you. If you have not yet contributed, please consider making a donation at centerforinquiry.ca/donate or becoming a member at centerforinquiry.ca/join.
Your contribution supports our efforts to have rational and evidence-based decision-making everywhere. CFIC is on the web at centerforinquiry.ca. We are on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter at CFI Canada. Podcast for Inquiry is produced and edited by Lee Shields, Zach Dumont, and Martin Zielinski. Music by Anthony Lazaro. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood. See you next time.